I never thought I'd be the kind of person who plotted revenge. I used to believe that karma had a way of sorting things out on its own, that justice might be slow, but it always arrived. But that was before I met Liam. Before I learned what betrayal from someone you love like family truly feels like. And before I realized that sometimes, if you want justice, you have to craft it yourself, piece by piece, like a work of art. Liam and I met in college. We were both majoring in computer engineering, both obsessed with startups and the dream of building something from scratch that would change the world. From the first group project we worked on together, we clicked. He was the creative visionary. I was the pragmatic builder. We stayed up late coding, planning, dreaming. We called ourselves brothers even before graduation. After college, we decided to co-found a startup together, an AI-based automation tool for logistics companies. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but we had the skills and the fire. For 5 years, we poured everything into it. Our time, our money, our souls. We lived in a shared apartment to save on rent, ate instant noodles to stretch every dollar, and pitched our product to anyone who would listen. Slowly, things started to move. Investors were interested. Clients were signing up. And for the first time, it looked like our gamble was paying off. But then Liam changed. It started small, taking meetings without telling me, making decisions on the product roadmap without looping me in. He said it was just streamlining things, that we needed a single voice to keep investors confident. I tried to believe him. He was my best friend, after all. My brother. Then, one day, I got a call from one of our biggest investors, asking why I had stepped away from the company. I was confused. I hadn't stepped away. But Liam had filed paperwork behind my back, slowly pushing me out of the company we built together. He'd rewritten contracts, shifted ownership percentages, even removed my name from future patents. Legally, I was still a shareholder, but barely. Practically, I was nothing. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He just shrugged. "You were holding the company back," he said. "I'm doing what's best for both of us." I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream. But instead, I walked away. I told myself I'd rebuild, that I didn't need him. But deep down, something had broken. Not just the trust, but the belief that I could ever forgive him. Months passed. He raised more funding. The company grew. And every time I saw his smug face in another tech article, another interview, I felt the fire grow hotter. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd erased me, pretended I never existed, and no one knew the truth. That's when the idea of revenge started to take root. At first, I told myself I just wanted closure, maybe to expose him publicly. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that exposing him wasn't enough. I didn't want people to just know what he'd done. I wanted him to feel it, the same way I had, blindsided, humiliated, powerless. And if there's one thing I know better than anyone, it's his company. I built half the damn infrastructure myself. I knew where the weak points were, the flaws in the back end that we'd always meant to fix one day. I also knew something else. Liam had grown greedy. He was cutting corners, overpromising features, and relying on my early code to keep things stable. And I knew exactly how to make that code crumble. Of course, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't about to commit a crime and ruin my life for revenge. But there's a difference between illegal sabotage and strategic exposure. And I was about to become very, very strategic. First, I reached out to a journalist I trusted, someone who'd covered our startup back in the early days. I told her I had a story. She was intrigued, but I needed proof. So I started digging. Using old admin credentials Liam had forgotten to revoke, I accessed internal logs, financial documents, security reports. Nothing illegal. I was still technically a shareholder. But what I found was worse than I imagined. Liam had been lying to investors about user growth. He'd inflated numbers by almost 300%. He'd promised enterprise-level security to clients, while still using outdated encryption libraries we'd written in year one. He'd even siphoned off company funds into a consulting firm that turned out to be his own shell company. It was everything I needed. And more. Next, I made sure the right people saw it. Not just the journalist, but also the board of directors, the major investors, and a few high-profile clients. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The fallout was immediate. Within a week, the board launched an internal investigation. Investors froze funding. Clients suspended contracts. The media had a field day. Silicon Valley golden boy under fire for fraud. Startup darling accused of financial misconduct. Liam's face was everywhere, but this time it wasn't smiling from a glossy magazine cover. He called me, of course, dozens of times. I ignored every one of them. Finally, he showed up at my apartment, desperate and furious. "Did you do this?" he shouted. "You ruined everything." I just looked at him and smiled. "No, Liam, you did." But I wasn't done yet. While the investigation tore his company apart, I reached out to a few key clients, ones I'd personally onboarded back in the early days. I told them I was starting a new venture, one that would offer everything we'd promised, but this time, for real. They jumped at the chance. Within 6 months, my new startup had secured $15 million in funding, more than Liam and I had ever raised together. And guess who came knocking, resume in hand, begging for a job? That's right. Liam. I didn't hire him, of course. I didn't even reply. But I did send him a gift, a framed copy of the original contract we'd signed when we started our first company, with one line highlighted, the line that named us brothers, partners, and equals. Below it, I wrote 3 words: "Never again, brother." Justice, I realized, isn't always about the law. Sometimes, it's about balance. And in the end, I didn't just take back what was mine. I took everything he tried to steal and built something better. And as I watched him fade into obscurity, the man who once thought he was untouchable, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I wish I could say that was the end of the story, that I rode off into the sunset while Liam wallowed in the ruins of his empire. But reality isn't that clean. Justice isn't a single satisfying blow. It's a slow, grinding process. And for me, that process was just getting started. The media storm around Liam's company didn't just hurt him. It vaporized everything. Lawsuits piled up. The SEC opened an investigation. Half the board resigned in disgrace. The remaining half tried desperately to distance themselves from him, but it was too late. The company's stock value nosedived, and within 8 months, it filed for bankruptcy protection. I watched the collapse from a distance, not with glee, but with an icy satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about symmetry. He had taken everything from me, and now, everything he'd built on that betrayal was gone. But Liam himself, he was still out there. And what surprised me most was how quickly he tried to reinvent himself. Within a year, he started popping up at tech conferences again, this time as a consultant for early-stage startups. He positioned himself as a cautionary tale, a man who had learned hard lessons and was now using his experience to help others avoid his mistakes. It was disgusting. People bought it too. The tech world has a short memory, and nothing sells better than a redemption arc. But I knew it was all a facade. He wasn't repentant. He was just desperate to claw his way back to relevance. That's when I decided that if this was going to be a story, I'd write the ending myself. I began digging again, Not into his company this time, but into him. Public records, old emails, burner accounts he thought no one knew about. What I discovered made my blood run cold. He hadn't just stolen from me, he'd stolen from others too. During our time together, he'd been running a quiet side hustle, taking confidential information from investor pitches we'd received and selling it to competitors. He'd also advised a few rival startups while we were still partners, feeding them insights from our roadmap. It was corporate espionage, plain and simple. And I had the receipts. I debated what to do. This was beyond exposure now. This was something that could land him in jail. And a part of me hesitated. Did I really want to destroy him completely? Wasn't what I'd done already enough? But then I remembered the night he betrayed me, the way he'd looked me in the eye and told me I was holding him back, the way he'd rewritten history to make himself the hero, and me the dead weight. No, it wasn't enough. So I reached out to a lawyer, a brutal, shark-like attorney who specialized in whistleblower cases. Together, we built a dossier. Emails, financial transfers, NDAs he'd violated, witness statements from people he'd screwed over. It was airtight. And then we quietly sent it to the authorities. I didn't expect what happened next. 2 months later, Liam was arrested at an airport while trying to fly to Singapore for a speaking engagement. The charges? Fraud, corporate theft, wire tampering, and unlawful disclosure of trade secrets. The tech world exploded. Suddenly, his redemption arc wasn't a story. It was a scandal. The trial dragged on for nearly a year. I was called to testify, and I told the court everything. How we met, how we built the company, how he betrayed me, how he'd continued betraying everyone else. He glared at me the entire time, like a wounded animal. But I didn't flinch. When the verdict came, guilty on 5 counts, I felt something inside me finally click into place. He was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. 6 years to think about everything he'd done. 6 years to watch the world move on without him. That might sound like the perfect ending. And for most people, maybe it would be. But for me, it was just part of the plan. You see, revenge, real revenge, isn't about destroying someone. It's about reshaping the world so they're erased from it. It's about making sure that every time someone hears their name, they think not of power or success, but of disgrace and ruin. So I went one step further. I took the story, my story, and I told it. At conferences, in interviews, in podcasts. I didn't name Liam directly. I didn't need to. Everyone knew. But I framed the narrative differently. I wasn't a victim. I was a cautionary tale for founders everywhere. Don't trust blindly. Don't sign away control. And never underestimate what betrayal can drive a person to do. The story went viral. It was cited in business schools. Investors referenced it in board meetings. And in the tech world, pulling a Liam became slang for stabbing your co-founder in the back. His name wasn't associated with innovation anymore. It was synonymous with treachery. That was the final blow. Not the lawsuits, not the bankruptcy, not even the prison sentence. The final blow was cultural annihilation, turning his legacy into a punchline. Years passed. My company thrived. We went public, expanded globally, and became one of the fastest-growing software providers in the logistics sector. I was invited to speak at Stanford, the same university where Liam and I once dreamed of making our mark. I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of young founders, and I told them the story. My story. And then, one evening, I got a letter. It was from Liam. He was 3 years into his sentence, and apparently, prison had given him plenty of time to think. The letter was long, rambling, bitter, but also pathetic. He apologized, of course. Said he regretted everything. Said he missed our friendship. Said he'd lost everything that mattered. At the bottom, he'd written, "I know you hate me, but please, when I get out, maybe we could meet. Just talk. Maybe forgive." I read it once, then I burned it. Forgiveness isn't for people like him. It's for people who make mistakes, not choices. And every step of his betrayal had been a choice. Now, sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I regret going so far. And the truth is, no, not even a little. Because here's the thing about betrayal. Once someone shows you who they really are, you can't unsee it. And once they've taken everything from you, there's nothing left to lose. I built my revenge, like we once built our company. Carefully, strategically, brick by brick. And when it was done, it wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Because he taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Blood doesn't make you family, loyalty does. And betrayal doesn't end with the moment they stab you in the back. It ends when you decide that the blade they use to cut you down is the same blade you'll use to carve your victory. After I burned Liam's letter, I thought I would never hear from him again. And for a long time, I didn't. Life moved on. My company expanded into Europe and Asia. We acquired 2 competitors, and our valuation soared past $1 billion. My name was finally where it belonged, on Forbes lists, tech summits, and keynote stages. People wanted my advice, my story, my insight. And every time they asked about my early days, I smiled and told them the truth, minus his name. But then, one afternoon, nearly 7 years after our fallout, I received an email from an unknown address. The subject line was simple: "Out now." I knew immediately who it was from. Liam was out of prison. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. The message was short and strange. "I know you probably never want to hear from me again. I can't blame you, but I need to see you. One last time. I need to tell you something, in person. It's not about forgiveness. It's about the truth." Against every instinct screaming at me to delete it and forget he ever existed, I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was closure. Maybe, deep down, I wanted to look him in the eye one final time. Not as brothers, not as enemies, but as 2 men who had destroyed each other and survived. We met at a small cafe downtown, a neutral ground. I arrived first and sat in the corner, back to the wall, watching the door. When he finally walked in, I barely recognized him. The once charismatic, sharp-dressed visionary was gone. In his place was a hollow man, thinner, older, with eyes that had seen too much. He sat across from me and didn't speak for almost a full minute. Then finally, he said, "You look good." I didn't respond. "I guess I don't," he added with a sad smile. We sat in silence for a while before he started talking. He didn't ask for forgiveness this time. He didn't try to justify himself. Instead, he confessed, not just about what he did to me, but everything else too. The lies, the manipulations, the betrayals I didn't even know about. And then he said something that shook me. "Back then," he said quietly, "I didn't betray you because I hated you. I did it because I envied you. You were better than me, smarter, calmer, more respected. And I hated that. I told myself I deserved everything. But deep down, I knew I was nothing without you. So I tried to take it all." I stared at him, trying to feel something. Pity, maybe. Or anger. But there was nothing left. Just emptiness. "I've spent 7 years thinking about that," he continued, "and I realized something. You didn't just destroy my company, you destroyed me. And I deserved it." He reached into his pocket and slid a small black notebook across the table. "This is everything I've been working on since prison," he said. Ideas, code, concepts. I don't have the means to build any of it. But you do. Consider it. Payment. My last attempt to make things right. I didn't touch the notebook. Why give this to me? I asked. Because it's the only thing I have left, he said. And because, for all the terrible things I did, a part of me still sees you as my brother. I left the cafe without saying another word. I left the notebook on the table. For weeks I couldn't stop thinking about that meeting. His words echoed in my head. I envied you. You destroyed me. You're still my brother. And yet, none of it mattered. I had spent too long rebuilding myself to let the ghost of the past haunt me again. But fate has a strange sense of humor. 6 months later, one of my engineers brought me a pitch deck from a new competitor. It was early stage, underfunded, underdeveloped, but the tech was good. Really good. Too good. And as I read through the proposal, my blood ran cold. The ideas, the algorithms, the architecture. It was his notebook. Liam had gone to someone else, and this time, they were gaining traction. At first, I laughed. Of course he had. Of course he couldn't let go. Of course he had to try one more time. But as the months passed, their startup began to grow. Investors loved them. Clients were intrigued. And for the first time in years, my company had a real competitor, one that seemed to know our every weakness. I wasn't angry. I was energized. This wasn't betrayal anymore. This was war. We doubled down. We accelerated product development, expanded into new verticals, and launched a marketing campaign so aggressive it bordered on ruthless. I used every ounce of knowledge I had about how Liam thought, his strategies, his tendencies, his blind spots, and weaponized them against his new venture. And yet they persisted. They adapted faster than I expected. They even poached a few of our smaller clients. It wasn't enough to hurt us, but it was enough to annoy me. And in that annoyance, something unexpected grew. A strange, twisted respect. This wasn't the same Liam I'd crushed years ago. Prison, humiliation, and failure had forged something different, sharper, colder, more dangerous. And I realized something terrifying. He might not win, but he wouldn't go down quietly this time. Then, one night, I received a call from a journalist. She wanted a comment on an emerging scandal involving Liam's new company. Apparently, an anonymous whistleblower had leaked documents showing shady financial practices, inflated user numbers, misreported revenue, even potential fraud. It was déjà vu. Only this time, I had nothing to do with it. The company collapsed within weeks. Investors pulled out. The board fired Liam again. And just like that, he was gone. I should have felt triumphant. But I didn't. For the first time, I felt hollow. Because this time, I hadn't beaten him. The world had. And it didn't feel like justice. It felt like inevitability. I heard, months later, that he'd moved to a small town in Montana. No internet. No startups. Just a cabin, a dog, and a quiet life. Maybe he was finally done fighting. Maybe he'd finally accepted the truth, that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. As for me, I never saw him again. And I never needed to. Because by then, I'd realized something profound. My revenge wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about punishing the past. It was about freeing myself from it. And in the end, that's exactly what I did. Years passed. My company matured into something bigger than I ever imagined. A global powerhouse with offices on 4 continents, partnerships with industry giants, and a reputation for innovation that set the standard in the logistics tech world. I was no longer just a founder or a CEO. I was an institution. And yet, despite all the accolades and milestones, one part of my story always followed me. The shadow of the man who betrayed me, and the vengeance that reshaped both our lives. Every time I spoke at a conference or gave an interview, people asked about it. They wanted the juicy details. They wanted to hear about the betrayal, the takedown, the poetic justice. But I never gave them the full story. I always said the same thing. I learned that betrayal doesn't end you, it forges you. And people nodded, inspired, never realizing just how much blood, sweat, rage, and cold calculation was buried under that sentence. And then, one night, something unexpected happened. I was speaking at a leadership summit in San Francisco, one of those glossy, overproduced events where founders trade stories of failure and redemption, like war veterans swapping battle scars. After my talk, during the networking mixer, a young man approached me. He couldn't have been more than 25, nervous, eager, eyes full of the same naive ambition Liam and I once had. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story changed my life. I was screwed over by my co-founder last year. I thought it was over. But then I read about what you went through, and I realized I could rebuild. And now, my company's growing faster than ever." I shook his hand, smiled, and wished him luck. But as he walked away, something clicked in my chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something deeper. Because in that moment, I understood what my revenge had truly accomplished. It wasn't just about balancing the scales between Liam and me. It wasn't even about justice. It was about creating a legacy, one built not on bitterness, but on resilience. My pain had become someone else's strength. My scars had become a roadmap for survival. And that was more powerful than revenge ever could be. Still, the past has a way of finding you. About a year later, I received a letter. Not an email, not a message. A handwritten letter sent to my office. The return address was a small town in Montana. I knew before I even opened it who it was from. It was short. Barely a page. "I don't expect you to reply. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry. For everything. I live quietly now. I grow vegetables. I fix things for neighbors. It's not much, but it's honest. And every day, I think about what I did. I hope, wherever you are, you've found peace. Liam." I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I just felt nothing. The chapter was over. The story had ended. There was nothing left to say. I didn't write back. I didn't tear it up either. I folded the letter and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, not as a memento, but as a reminder of how far I had come, of what I had survived, of how betrayal, once the worst thing that had ever happened to me, had become the reason I was standing where I was. Years turned into decades. I eventually stepped down as CEO, handing the reins of my company to someone I trusted, someone who, ironically, reminded me a little of Liam before everything went wrong. And as I walked away from the company I'd built, I felt no bitterness, no regret, just pride. Looking back now, I can see the story clearly. Not just the betrayal and the revenge, but the entire arc. Two men started a dream together. One betrayed the other. The betrayed rebuilt. And in doing so, he created something stronger than both of them combined. If you asked me whether I'd do it all again, the anger, the plotting, the exposure, the lawsuits, the destruction, I'd say yes. Every single step. Because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about proving that betrayal doesn't define you. Your response does. And my response was simple. I refused to be the victim. I built something out of the ashes. I turned pain into purpose. I made sure that every time someone tried to erase me, I came back louder, stronger, and more relentless than before. And in the end, I didn't just win. I transcended. There's a saying I once heard. Revenge is a dish best served cold. But I think that's wrong. Revenge isn't a dish. It's a forge. And if you're strong enough, patient enough, ruthless enough, you don't just serve it. You reshape the entire table on which it's served. That's what I did. And that's why, even now, years later, I can look back on every scar, every sleepless night, every ounce of rage, and feel nothing but gratitude. Because without him, without the betrayal, I might never have become who I am. And as for Liam, somewhere in a quiet town in Montana, there's a man who once thought he was untouchable. He lives alone now, with his regrets, and his vegetables, and his ghosts. Maybe he's found peace. Maybe he hasn't. But me? I found mine a long time ago, and it began the moment I stopped seeing revenge as punishment, and started seeing it as transformation. Because in the end, he didn't destroy me. He defined me. And I built my empire on the very foundation of his betrayal. That's the funny thing about people who stab you in the back. They never realize they're just handing you the knife. And once you know how to wield it, there's nothing they can do to stop you. So if you're listening to this, if you've been betrayed, if you've been broken, if someone you loved turned on you and left you bleeding, hear this. You are not finished. You are not powerless. You are not done. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Because one day, you'll look back on that betrayal not as the worst thing that ever happened to you, but as the reason you rose higher than you ever thought possible. And when that day comes, you'll understand what I learned all those years ago. That revenge, real revenge, isn't about hurting them. It's about building you. And when you finally stand on top of the world, unbreakable, unstoppable, untouchable, you'll realize something beautiful. They didn't ruin your life. They made it worth living.